Okay, all right. Now the next thing that we're going to focus on, is PubMed client.py. PubMed client.py is the file right after clinical trials client.py. This is also a part of ingestion. Okay, so now what you're doing is you're understanding for production grade applications how the ingestion layer works. Okay, what is the purpose of this particular file? It's pretty straightforward. It is going to talk to the PubMed database. Okay, this PubMed database, and PubMed database talks to PubMed client. Okay, now what does PubMed database contain? It contains millions of published medical research papers. That is what it contains. And your clinicaltrials.gov is going to contain the research studies, and in order to reference those research studies we need research papers, and those research papers are available on PubMed. Okay, why do we need this? The idea here is very simple. See, the thing is clinicaltrials.gov is going to contain the research study and what that research study has promised to measure. Okay, when it comes to PubMed actually tells us what researchers actually published. Okay, as to we started with a particular a promise, and then actually what did we end up achieving. The difference between the two is what we call as signals, and this is what our agents are going to measure, which is signals. Okay, for example, a research trial files that no serious side effects are observed, but the 3 published research papers discussing the concerning safety events, that gap is a signal worth flagging, right? For example, what does your research say, or what was promised in the research? That there are going to be no side effects. What was actually published? There are 3 research papers who are suggesting that there have been instances where safety concerns have arisen. Now thing is, that is the signal. Okay, and this is what your agents are going to catch. Okay, how our PubMed is going to work? PubMed typically works with we're going to work with 2 separate API calls, eSearch and eFetch. eSearch, wherein we're going to send a search query and we're going to get a list of paper IDs. These are the research paper IDs, which is also called as an NCT ID. Okay, basis the NCT ID, we're going to get the exact research papers. Now from those research paper IDs, we need to fetch the title, abstract and the authors, and that is what we're going to do. At the rate limiting part, typically what we're going to do is we're going to add a 400 millisecond breather or a 400 millisecond sleep between 2 requests, so that we are well under the limit. If I'm talking about 400 milliseconds, that is roughly 2.5 requests per second, which is below the standard limit of 3 requests per second limit. Okay, I hope this is interesting to you. Let's proceed with building. I am going to start with importing async.io. Async.io is Python's inbuilt library, which is typically used for async processing. Okay, and when it comes to async, here we're also going to use async.io.sleep. Okay, which is nothing but which helps us pause between the requests. Okay, to respect the rate limits. Okay, and we're going to use the async await pattern for all our methods. Okay, after that I am going to import httpx. Okay, so httpx is an async http client. Okay, this is like requests, but it's basically built for async code. Okay, and we use a httpx here. Okay, unlike clinicaltrials.py, where we use requests. So in clinicaltrials.py we used requests. Here we are using httpx. Okay, now because the thing is, your PubMed, okay, does not have the same bot protection as clinicaltrials.gov. httpsx works fine with PubMed database, so there are going to be no 403 errors. And always use the right tool for the right job. Yeah, remember this. From typing, I'm going to import any. Okay, so any is basically a type hint, right? Meaning this can be of any this meaning this can be of any data type. Yeah, and then from tenacity I am going to import retry. I am going to import stop after attempt. I am going to import weight exponential, and then I am going to import retry if exception type. Okay, this looks fantastic. Okay, all right, so the same retry library, okay, this is the same retry library that we had used in clinical trials clinical trial client. Okay, and stop after attempt, okay, we're going to set it 3, which is you need to stop after the 3 failed attempts. Weight exponential means wait longer between each retry attempt, and retry if exception type, which means only retry on specific error values. Okay, or error types, not error values, error types. Okay, then I'm just going to write from config.settings. I'm going to import settings. Okay, from config.logging_config, I'm going to import setup logging. Okay, and then I'm just going to create this, okay, which is setup logging. Okay, yeah, sorry, yeah. All right, so this name here that you see is what is ingestion.pubmed client. Okay, so I'll just write here, it means what, ingestion.pubmed_client, that is what it means. Okay, all right, this looks fine, and every log line from this file, shows that particular model path. Okay, once I am done with this, what I plan to do is I also intend to define constants, and in constant the first thing that I will be putting is the base URL. Okay, then I'll be putting the request, just a minute, request timeout. Then I'll be putting max retries. Okay, then I'll be putting fetch batch size. Okay, and then I'll be putting rate limit sleep. This is what I will be putting in here. Okay, now we know that fetch batch size is what we're going to set it to 20. Okay, so this means that how many paper IDs, okay, that I want to fetch in one efetch call. Efetch is the API call that we're going to do. Okay, so now when it comes to my PubMed accepts multiple IDs in one requests, and we're going to batch them. We're going to create a batch of 20 papers, and 20 is kind of a safe batch size, is what I feel, that avoids hitting the URL length limits. Okay, max number of retries I'm going to set it to 3. We have already discussed this. Request timeout I'm going to set it to 30. Okay, which is the maximum seconds to wait for PubMed to respond, and then it is asking for PubMed URL. So I'm just going to say settings dot, we have already defined this, so settings dot PubMed base URL. Okay, that is what, and rate limit I'm just going to put it to 400 milliseconds, so 0.4. Okay, all right, this looks fine. By the way, rate limit sleep is again how many seconds to sleep between the API requests. Okay, all right, this looks fine. Let's proceed. We are going good. Let's go and define the class, and the class is PubMed client. Okay, and now we're going to define a client for downloading research papers from PubMed. Okay, and as we discussed, this works in 2 steps. One is eSearch, which is going to find the paper IDs, okay, that is going to match our query, and the second is eFetch. Okay, and what is eFetch going to do? It is going to get the full details, okay, from the paper IDs. That is what is details, as in it is going to get the title, it is going to take the abstract, all of that. Okay, right, cool, let's proceed. So I'm just going to create the first method, okay, the constructor method, sorry. Yeah, and now I'm just going to say self dot client, okay, and I'm just going to put into HTTPX async client, okay, none equals to none, okay, just a minute, yeah, none equals to none, yeah. So now HTTPX is, we know this, it's an async HTTP client, okay, and unlike requests.session, HTTPX.async client is natively async, okay. So we do not need async io.to_thread that we used in clinical trials here, okay. So next comes in async function, okay, yeah. And what I'm going to do is this, I'm just going to put in pubmed client, okay, looks fine, yeah. Yeah, and here I'm just going to, now what this particular function is going to do, this should be pubmed client, yeah. And what does this do is basically it is going to get called automatically when entering the async with block, whenever it enter, it is going to call this automatically, okay, and it creates the HTTPX async client, okay, with shared configuration. That is what it will be doing, okay. So here I'll just say self._client, okay, equals to HTTPX.async client, what is wrong, async client, and something is off here, async client, I don't know what is going on, just give me a minute please. This looks fine to me. Async client, yeah, I think we're good, yeah. All right, and here I'll be just defining the timeout, okay, which is HTTPX dot timeout, and I'll be just putting the request timeout here, okay, which is apply the 30-second timeout to all the requests, okay. And HTTPX dot timeout, it wraps the number into a proper timeout object that applies to the connection read and write separately, okay. Then we'll be defining headers, okay, and in headers I'm just going to say accept, okay, application JSON, okay, which basically we're going to tell PubMed that we prefer JSON responses whenever they are available, okay. When it comes to efetch, okay, this efetch actually returns XML regardless of this header, okay. So we handle XML parsing separately in Park. We'll be building something called as parse XML response. There we'll be handling it differently, okay. All right, so I'll be just saying logger.info, and I'll say PubMed client opened, okay, and I'll just return self here, okay. The next function is exit, so I'll just say async yeah, and in here I'm just going to say exe type C, exe, this should be val, and this should be exc_tb, okay. And what will this do is basically this will be again called automatically when exiting the async with block, okay. And this closes the HTTPX client and releases the network connections, that is what it does, okay. And now I'll just say if self.client, okay, I'm just going to say await, okay, self.client dot a close, okay, self.client dot a close, okay. And now a close is basically the async version of the close method. Okay, and we must await it. Okay, because HTTPX is async and closing the connection is itself an async operation. That is the reason we do this. Okay, and I'm just going to say logger.info. Okay, PubMed client closed. See here, we opened the client, we fetched the data, we closed it. Okay, now when you will be already accessing this code, you will be having a much cleaner, much better commented version of the code. Okay, as of now, for just explanation purposes, I'm writing it this way. Okay, you can refer to the clean commented code. Okay, all right, now let us go and focus on the core method. Okay, which is to fetch the papers. Okay, let's do it in the next video.